How do you not go crazy while doing magic? How do you not lose your connection to reality when what you do is reality bending by its very nature? How do you maintain a connection to the objective, mundane world when everything that inspires you and brings you passion is not of this world as far as you understand? Let's take a step back for a moment and let's ask ourselves how the majority of people come into the practice of magic. Generally speaking, in order for you to become someone who is even willing to entertain the notion that magic is real, you already, by definition, by many skeptics, would be considered at least borderline crazy. You have a denial about what they think of as objective fact. So let's get this out of the way right off the bat. You're already on the spectrum of what normal, rational, mundane reality thinks is not normal, not right, not okay. They would change you if they could. Now, there's a lot of open-minded people, even in the skeptical world, who are willing to allow you to have what they think of as a delusion on the off chance, the very off chance, that what you're doing has value to you or is perhaps even real. But we have to respect and understand that what we do by very nature is not of the objective world. We have to understand and accept that the subjective world is the only true reality and the objective world is a consensual agreement. The objective reality is not at all the only one true reality. It is rather the reality that we all agree upon. That doesn't mean you can be in denial of it and succeed in life. It doesn't mean you can go against it and have all your dreams come true just by believing it's not real. What it means is there's an interplay between your subjective truth and the objective world, and they influence one another very strongly. The world you see around you exists on the border and the boundary between the subjective that you experience and the subjective that other people experience. Imagine like bubbles. And when you have a bunch of bubbles together in one spot, it forms usually like little boxes, actually. They tend to form little cubes. They compress together and they kind of form cubes most of the time. Except for on the outside, they still look like a bubble. Where each of these bubbles is touching, there's an influence. It changes the shape of that bubble's subjective experience. In a very same way, this is how it works for all of us in a spiritual, metaphysical sense. What you experience as reality is completely 100% real. No matter how delusional others might call it, it is real. However, that doesn't mean that you are influencing their reality for them to see it the same way. That doesn't mean that what you're seeing is true for them. It means it's only true for you. And if enough people around you, if enough things around you, because it's not limited to just people, it's also including inanimate things, things that we think of as dead. Even they have their own subjective reality. Every singularity of energy has its own reality matrix, its own reality experience, which is no less valid than anyone else's. And it is in this aggregate that we have this emergent phenomenon of objective reality, this maya, this delusion. It is only between the bumping of these little subjective bubbles that we get this illusion. Now, the problem arises from a kind of attachment to this idea that things are better or worse when they're more real or less real. This idea that only the truth, in the most objective sense, is good, whereas the subjective truth is less good because it cannot be shared. That's a value judgment. That's a decision. That's a preference. That's a choice made by the heart chakra. And it's not invalid. It's not wrong. It simply, once again, only applies to the individual for whom it applies. If I believe that reality is a certain way and I function within that paradigm of reality, it works for me and I have a fulfilling life, why does it matter if it matches exactly what someone else thinks? We see this all the time in non-magical things. We see this in preference for what flavor ice cream you like, or do you even like ice cream? We see this in a preference for music, sexual partners. Every last thing that we experience is based on a preference that is based upon a very private, subjective experience. And all of reality, all of objective reality is based upon this subjective preference that you have. You prefer to see the color blue as you see it, and that's why it looks that way. You don't see the color blue as it's probably appearing right behind me right now. You don't see it that color because I made you see it that way. It doesn't look like that at all. The color blue is an entirely subjective experience that cannot be shared. We can agree that something is blue, but we can't agree on what blue looks like. This is the foundation of all objective reality, is based on this subjective paradox. So when someone asks me, how do you practice magic and not go completely insane? It's kind of a paradoxical answer. It's kind of a tongue twister for my brain. How do I wrap my head around telling you that there is no such thing truly in the spiritual sense as insanity? But yet there are people who are unhealthily, perhaps, detached from objective reality in a way that can cause them to be dangerous to themselves or others, perhaps. Or maybe that's just what we see as our interpretation of their own sympathetic bubble. See, what you have to understand is, I've told this story before in a lot of live streams and a lot of other videos. If I perform a magic spell where I am convinced, and maybe have had the experience, that I can fly upon doing it, and I jump off my roof to prove it to you, because your belief is such that I will fall to my death, you will almost certainly see that happen. But it's also possible, if my belief is correct, that I will take off and fly. And our two subjective realities will diverge. I will move into a reality where I can fly. You will stay in a reality where I cannot. This multiverse, this many worlds theory of quantum physics, if you will, being evoked to truly explain magic for the first time in a rational way. Because most of you who claim quantum physics as your explanation for magic don't know the first fucking thing about it. And I know like the first thing, but I don't know the second, third, or fourth thing. But a lot of you couldn't even add two numbers together, let alone do the math that goes behind it. A lot of you know quantum physics only from your History Channel videos that you watch, where you get some crackpot jumping up and say, well, because of quantum physics we know, and the double slit experiment, therefore. But they can never really rationalize why. Until now, if you understand the multiverse theory, the many worlds theory, as being one of the most plausible explanations for the double slit experiment and the outcomes therein, and all the iterations of that experiment that have happened. It is only likely to be true because there's a multiverse in which all has happened and all is happening simultaneously right now. All possibility exists. It is not a possibility, it does exist as an event that is happening. Somewhere in the universe right now, this is on fire, and I'm screaming and putting it out. Somewhere where our roles are exchanged and I'm watching you in a video. And all of those realities are valid, and they're all happening. And they're all being observed by the source, split into an infinite number of branching paradigms, branching iterations, and all of them, all of these individuals are valid. All of them are real. But they all lead to the same truth, the same consciousness. So how can you call one mind insane and another one rational? All we're really doing is we are defining reality based upon a consensual agreement that something is true. And that is, by definition, a matter of perspective. If you're colorblind, this symbol looks completely different to you than it's going to look to me. If you're blind, you won't see anything at all, and we can't agree upon what color it is. If you're deaf, you'd have to read the closed captions. You have no idea what my voice sounds like. If you're enlightened, if you've had a moment of satori, if you recognize, if you've gone through the looking glass and the universe has been inverted in that way, and you suddenly understand things through a new lens, it looks completely different than it does to someone else. Someone who is of a completely materialistic, objective mind will think that no matter how valid your experience, no matter how much you can prove it in your magical manifestations, no matter how much you can prove that it's real, they will see you as crazy. Don't you think they're crazy that they can't see it? Don't you think that they're in denial? They think you're in denial. What's the difference? Who's right? You're both right. 100%, without any shadow of a doubt. So what we're really talking about when we're talking about insanity versus reality, subjective, objective, we're talking about preferences. We're talking about behavior that we like or don't like in others. We don't really like it when someone runs around talking about UFOs and aliens and ghosts if we're a rational person. And we don't like it when people disregard our spiritual experiences just because we can't prove them with science. We have a preference for one kind of expression or another. And this is what we define sanity versus insanity as. We don't like it when a person goes crazy and chops up their family and puts them in a meat grinder. Of course, that would be horrible. Duh. We love it when we do the opposite, when we put a cow, we chop them up and put them in the meat grinder and feed them to our family. That's great. What's order for the spider is chaos for the fly, said Morticia in the Addams Family. What is sane and what is insane is by definition a subjective decision that we make about one another. It's a judgment. Someone who sees reality in a way that we don't agree with doesn't mean they're crazy. It doesn't mean that they have a mental disorder even. However, this is where things get a little fuzzy. Because we can influence each other's subjective reality bubble, because we can quite literally shift into a reality that is so adjacent to one another that we are still connected to one another but experiencing a different reality, because we can do that. People don't realize it, but we can. That means our actions can influence them when we go crazy, quote unquote. If I decide today that, as Azazel said, I am making you the greatest warrior that ever lived, go take your weapon and go prove it to the world by slaying mass quantities of people. I mean, it would never do that. By the way, FBI, if you're watching, this is a hypothetical joke. But let's say that happened, and I decided to go completely crazy and run amok and shoot everybody and become a menace and have to be put down like a rabid dog. In my reality bubble, I was doing exactly the rational thing. In your reality bubble, I killed your dog and your friend and maybe someone you love, maybe you. We can't have that. And so while we are still within a close enough adjacent objective sphere, while someone is still within our rational bubble and influencing us with their subjective opinions and abilities and actions, we sort of have to have a consensus where we say, this person doesn't fit our objective reality. And we have to take steps to limit their influence in our life rationally, humanely, ethically. Unless, of course, they're really hurting you. And I agree with Anton LaVey in that case. Ask them to stop, and if they don't, destroy them utterly. So what I'm getting at, ultimately, is that if you want to stay grounded, if you want to avoid insanity, if you want to avoid this problem, stop seeing it as a problem. Recognize that reality is fully and utterly malleable. And choose to dwell within a reality which is polite, noble. Don't expect everyone to believe the same thing you believe. Don't go out of your way to prove that spirits exist, that magic is real, and to confront people who disagree with you. Don't go to other occultists and say, you're wrong because my spirit said this and he says you're wrong. Stop with the witch wars. Stop with the bullshit. Stop trying to tear each other down and destroy other religions, even the ones that you know are hurting humanity. Rather, turn it inward. Empower yourself. Align yourself with truth as you see it and express it. Be a beacon, be a light. Be someone who can share the truth that you see and inspire others to see it as truth. But be careful. Just be careful. What you're asking for could come true. Do you want to lead a cult of fanatics who run around and run amok and murder people for you because you dislike some other person? All right, that does sound like fun, but that's not really going to fly because people like me are going to destroy you. People like me are going to come against you. And people with guns and, the FBI and stuff probably get involved, right? choose to live in a noble, polite, considerate, compassionate world, even as a left-hand path practitioner. Because again, the left-hand path doesn't mean that you have to act evil. It simply means you don't have taboos. It simply means that you respect the fact that you have the power to be evil. And evil doesn't really exist. It's a subjective consideration. Just as you have a choice to be a little different. But let's also understand that that choice is not entirely up to our ego. How we see reality is not a decision that our ego makes. It's a decision that our higher self sort of chooses for us by putting in front of us what it wants us to experience. More aptly, it's more like your eye reading across a book and a page, like a choose your own adventure, and it's choosing which page to go to next. And you're just the objective gaze of that great eye of the source, looking through the keyhole of your mortal avatar. Now, I will say one thing, and we're going to come back down. That all was kind of metaphysical. Let's come back down to reality a little bit. Let's bring this back down to a mundane thing, and let's sort of like throwing a ball up in the air and watching it go all the way up. We're going to watch it come back down and bounce, and we're going to catch it in the middle. So take what I just said, the as above. That's the as above answer to insanity. Let's go to the so below. Something like that. The so below answer. You have to recognize that a lot of people get into the occult practice because they are, as I said in the beginning, already loosely on loose ground when it comes to reality. They're already standing on loose ground. They have probably experienced things that have shaken them. They might have a physical, biological, chemical reason for their mind having a distorted view of reality. They are people who have suffered emotional trauma, physical trauma, life trauma. That doesn't make you a victim, by the way. So if you're suddenly going, oh, someone finally understands, I'm such a victim, throw that shit out. If you want to stop being crazy, that's the first thing you got to do. You're not a victim. But you're an experiencer, and you've experienced trauma. Almost everybody watching this video, if I were to challenge each one of you to put in a comment whether or not you've experienced dramatic emotional trauma, personal outcast experiences, if you felt eccentric and unable to relate to the rest of humanity except for the weirdos that we all hang out with in this occult community, I'm going to say such a vast majority are going to agree with me that I could probably bet millions of dollars and I could bet everything and I wouldn't have to worry. I'm sure there'll be one or two holdouts, but I'm sure out of the many that comment and watch my videos, the vast majority of you will agree that you've been through some shit. That you live on the island of misfit toys. You are, when I say broken, I don't mean like in an inferior way, like you're saying, like, oh, I'm so broken. I mean, you've been broken. You've experienced trauma. You've experienced emotional heartache. You have an addiction, or you had an addiction. You have PTSD from military. Your PTSD from child abuse and all this other stuff. Your shadows are long. Your body is fragile and frail. There's something wrong that's made you reach into the higher powers that be for something to heal you, to protect you, to empower you. No one turns to Satan because they're already a badass, just like no one turns to Jesus because they're already a freaking millionaire. E.A. Queding and I have been talking privately quite a bit, and one of the things that came up that was really fun for us to talk about was this conversation about how people who live in the gutters, people who live on the outskirts of society, people who are broken, turn to spirituality almost like clockwork at some point in their life. How remarkable and powerful that is. The spirit world seems to reach out to those people because we reach out to the spirit world, and that is because we've been outcast from society in a way. We've been hurt. We've been damaged. Our family didn't love us. Someone hurt us. Or we fucked up, let's be honest. Some of us, we did the wrong thing. We were criminals, whatever reason. We were selfish. For whatever reason, we're outcasts from normal society. And we already see the world through a different lens. We're already a little apart. We're already a little separate. We don't fit in. We don't play the reindeer games. We're Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, going to the island of misfit toys. We are broken in that sense. And again, broken doesn't mean that you're really broken. It's just a metaphor. Society views you as broken, perhaps. You're a goth. You're a metalhead. You have a fetish. You're an outcast somehow. So you're already beyond the pale, which is what that literally means. The pale means the fence. You're beyond the pale. You're out in the weeds. You're out in the wilderness. You're the wild man in the woods already, without even having to practice magic. And so it's a very short step from being already that disconnected with the objective reality around us to start doing magic. And this of course alienates you that much more. Now, someone who is already suffering, especially if they've got a condition, a disease, if they have a mental disorder that's brought on by something physical, maybe they have brain damage, maybe they suffered an emotional breakdown, something happened, changed them. Someone who has bad enough schizophrenia and can't tell the difference between reality and what isn't, at least in this material perspective. As I said in the as above section of this video, maybe they're not so crazy. But that person with schizophrenia who sees things that everyone agrees is not there. The paranoid schizophrenic who thinks everyone's out to get them, or that they alone are the living embodiment of a god. Not in the way I say it. People get me for that. They'll say, oh, Thorne, you're so arrogant, egotistical, you think you're a god, blah, blah, blah. No, I know I'm a god. I know you're a god too. But I don't think I'm Napoleon. I don't think I'm Baal. I think of myself as the source. I see myself as that divinity. That doesn't mean that I am delusional. As a non-dualist, that is the rational perspective. As a non-dualist, that's the only rational perspective you can have. Everything else is delusion and maya. To see yourself as anything other than the source, than the divinity, than the sleeping God that is dreaming of this material experience. To see it any other way is the delusion. So when you're someone who turns to magic for these things, and you start to see reality bend and shift, if you've already got these conditions, it'll exacerbate them. You'll be much more likely to have a break with reality and to start doing things that the rest of us, even some of us who are already a little crazy, would consider insane. And we will have to deal with you. Hopefully in a humane way. Hopefully, as necessary. So how do we avoid this? How do we take that as above, throw it way up in the air, have it come down, bounce off the so below, and how do we catch it in the middle? How do we structure our practices so that we don't completely lose touch, so that we can have practices that have a great deal of power? Take both of those stories, those as above and so below explanations, and merge them together as best you can. Recognize that you live in a subjective truth bubble that is completely real for you, and no one has the right to change it for you. And in the same sympathetic way, you don't have a right to do that to other people either. This is why one of the things I love about the left-hand path occult community is that there's not a lot of dogma going on. There's some, like we work with dogma, but we are not dogmatic religiosity kind of people. We don't believe in only one doctrine for a spirit. E.A. Quedding and I, and all these other people that I work with, the people at Dark Sorcery, Alfredo, J.B. Perry, Whalen, Uriel, Michael Hyson, all of us will have different ways that we will see a spirit. Carrie, my friend, we all have different ways of seeing these things. And sometimes we'll disagree. There's a disagreement going on in a private group about the nature of Lilith and Kali, and are they related, and so on. It's a beautiful discussion. So long as no one is trying to declare with certainty that it is or is not the same being. So long as we are allowed to each have our own personal experience of that divinity, we're doing it okay. And we're going to get gnosis that's valuable to us personally, that we can share with the world and make it a better place for all of us. And not in a moralistic way. In that ethical Luciferian way, where if I'm making the world better, then I experience a better world and it's cool for me. And I'm still an individual inside of it. That's the beating heart of Luciferianism right there. So that's one thing you need to do. As a practicing magician, sorcerer, theurgist, thaumaturgist, it's important for you to respect the sovereignty of other people's specific personal experiences. Do not deny them what they experience. However, do not allow them to forcefully, aggressively change yours. Communicate, inspire, share, be open. Allow others to be different. It's the only way it can work. The moment you try to create an objective bubble in which your subjective is adopted by everyone else in a forceful, aggressive way, the moment you start doing that, the moment you start heading towards that insanity spectrum, the moment you become attached to an idea like that and a dogma like that and try to convince the world of it, is the moment that you jump off the diving board into the crazy world. It's the moment that you begin to make enemies in reality, and this enemy, this trauma, this stress, these adversaries are going to just drive you completely insane. Because I promise you, your magic will fail you when it needs to work most. Because the spirits aren't into that, especially the ones we work with on the left-hand path. They're not into making your reality bubble the only one for everyone else. They do want your own personal reality bubble to be beautiful for you. And they will utterly elevate you and make you ascend in that space. And that will influence people around you to see something like what you're saying. But it should never be something that is forced on everyone else. Be content that your experience of magic is your experience of magic. Don't try to force it into the world. That one step alone will mean the majority of the world will leave you alone to practice in peace, and they won't call you crazy, and they won't stress you out, and they won't prevent you. Just that one piece alone. The next thing you can do is take breaks. Don't make spirituality and magic the only thing that you do. Now, this can be hard because the point is to integrate the spirit with the mundane. And a lot of people who do spiritual things, they actually try to remove the mundane. And that's wrong. And when I say wrong, I mean it's unhealthy. It's right for you, but it's wrong in the healthy sense. If you want to maintain your sanity and continue to work with spirits till the day you die, then you cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater. You have to accept that the ultimate goal of ascension, it may take you many lifetimes, is to eventually be an embodied being with God-like experience. I didn't say power. I said experience. There's a reason for that. Maybe I'll teach you what that means at some point. But the point of you being here is to be an invoked divinity, to be an avatar, a fully realized avatar, in which your subjective and objective world becomes one. What you see and imagine in your mind becomes true immediately. But it's not a power, it is an interface. It is a perfect interface. That can't happen if you're excluding the mundane reality from your awareness, if you're denying what is the consensus, just because you think it doesn't suit you. You have to learn to integrate with the consensus, with the objective. You have to learn to surf that reality wave to get to where you want to go, rather than completely destroy the ocean because it doesn't suit you. While you are embodied in this life, you can't escape it short of ending this body. So while you're here, trapped, if you will, because you're not trapped, this is a choice you made. While you're in this body, if you want to have the healthiest, most productive experience, you need to stay grounded in reality as we understand it, enough so that you're not defying reality. Because there's nothing worse than being a very powerful sorcerer and having a scientist come along and prove why you're wrong. There's nothing worse than saying, I can do this and that with my magic, and have somebody test you and have it not work. Because I don't know anybody who practices magic who can experience that and not have a moment of doubt, a moment of insanity creep in, where they question, what have I been doing all this time? Or why didn't it work? Is my methods wrong? Something's going to shake your foundation. You have to accept that it may not work that way. You have to accept that your experience of magic is subjective and others will deny it. And let that be okay. And don't deny their mundane reality. Make it work for you. Computers exist. Learn to use them in magic. For example. You probably can't read minds like Hollywood says. Hollywood is a joke. That's the other I'm going to get into for a moment. Is our expectations. And that's also what drives us crazy. Hollywood, mythology, fairy tales. They teach us that magic is this incredibly unreal thing. We can fly on a broom, we can light fires with the power of our mind, we can invade people's dreams and kill them, and it's going to be like a video game, like a movie, like so visceral and real. In all of my years of magic, although I have had things happen that were unexplainable and fit some of those Hollywood stereotypes, that is the exception, not the rule. The vast majority of magical experiences are rather mundane in their manifestation. They're synchronistic in nature. I did a ritual to open roads and remove blockages from my career, and next thing I know, I'm talking to prominent people. There was no lightning bolts, although they do sometimes happen. Hi, Roy. There was no trumpets sounding. There was no shaking of the walls and a chariot drove through and King Paimon said, "I will do for you what you ask." Ha ha ha. No. No, of course not. There's nothing like that. And it doesn't have to be. So expectation is another thing that can make us crazy in magic. When we expect everything to be like Hollywood, we do everything in our power to make it like Hollywood. We start faking things. We start exaggerating things that we experience, and we become detached. The reality is, all of those myths, all of those stories, all of those things that we talk about, they did happen, but they happened largely internally for those people. When someone said that they were walking through the forest and the spirit of such and so appeared to them, that doesn't mean that a portal opened up out of the ground and the physical body of a spirit appeared before them. Because the ancients didn't make this distinction that we make today between the internal and the external. Today we have a hang-up as materialistic people where we like to think that our thoughts and our imagination are just our thoughts and imagination and they have no more value than that. That they're like a drawing board that we can draw whatever we want and then it's not real because we can crumple it up and throw it out. No. The ancients would tell you that that internal experience is just as valid as the external because they're the same thing. The ancient masters of metaphysics understood that what we experience in the external world is actually a reflection in the internal world. Nothing you see in your environment exists the way you see it. That is a representation of what is, but it is not what is. It's a reflection of what is, at best. It is a metaphor for what is. The ancients knew this, and so when an ancient had a vision of a god, they didn't doubt that their imagination could be the spirit talking to them. And they probably did make a distinction between something they just thought of and something that came to them from another outside feeling. But even if they couldn't, they would still run with it, and it would often work for them. That doesn't mean they could work magic intuitively all the time, just because they had that awareness. But I do think it meant that when someone was in tune with magical currents, when someone was able to influence reality using that stuff, it was a lot easier. You see, I don't think there's any less or more magic I think everything's magic, honestly. But I don't think there's any more magicians or sorcerers in the world today than there were in the past. In fact, there's probably more admitted ones, for sure. Probably a lot more practicing ones. But in the past, it was more acceptable. And so people were permitted. When I say acceptable, I mean barring the Inquisition and all that stuff. It was more permissible in ancient times for someone to be a seer, to be a messenger of the gods, to practice various whatevers, folk religions, magic, whatever. And since they were able to do that, they didn't have that barrier of skepticism or restriction. and they could let their imaginations run wild and do what it needed to do. And again, there's not a lot of historical records of some witch doing a spell and something happened. If you notice, the history books of magic and spirituality are filled more with prophets and seers, and only a handful that were capable of performing anything resembling a miracle. There's a reason for that too, which I'm not going to get into. Suffice to say, those people who were seers, prophets, shaman, guides, guardians of the spiritual realms, their role hasn't changed. It's the same today as it's always been. Your job is not to just use magic to get yourself a bigger car, a sexier boyfriend or girlfriend, a lot of money, a house. That's all nice. Your job, if you have the gift of magic, is to be the interface for the mundane-minded people so that they can experience through you the supernatural world of the astral, of the spirit world. That is your job. That is where you're going to get fulfillment. And I don't mean this in a moralistic sense. I mean this in a rational sense. You have a hand in order to use the hand to hold things. You have a gift to see and experience spirits because you are meant to share it. You are meant to speak about it and to help people with what you see. Not force the world to comply with you all the time. And I say all the time because, of course, you are meant to force the world to comply with you, but in that respectful way in which you allow others to have their own reality, unless there's a reason to really corrupt them. If you want to be independent, you need to be independent of your need to destroy, but be able to do it anyway. So what else can you do? This will be the final option. Take time and ground yourself. There's a whole myriad of ways you can do that. The simplest and best is to just put away your magical supplies for a little while. Close your altar room up. Lock it. Walk away for a day, a week, a month. Yeah, a whole month. There's nothing wrong with it. The spirit world will be there when you get back. They're going to be there anyway. I'm not saying turn them off. I'm not saying don't pay attention to them. I'm just saying walk away from your practices for a little while. Go hiking. Return to nature. And if the spirits come to you full force when you're doing that, all the better. But you let it go. Let it go for a little bit. Play some video games. Work a double shift. Take someone out on a date and don't talk about magic for a few hours. Watch politics and get angry about it. Do something mundane and boring. Allow yourself to just be pretend magic isn't real for a minute. This is something that I mentioned in Become the Maelstrom that's important. You need to be able to shift between different dogmas and different belief systems at will. Not just different religions. A lot of you can't do that. You pretend you can. You're eclectic. You include a lot of things, but you aren't capable of switching between one belief system and another for more than a split second. It's important, I think, in magic to learn to be able to, while you're working with Goetic magic, that's the only magic there is, or whatever version of it you practice. While you're working with the Necronomicon, that's the true magic. While you're working with Christianity, that's the true religion. Well, you need to be able to become a skeptic for a few hours and not believe. Now that can be painful, or it can be easy. All you really have to do, though, is not deny the magic, just forget it. Just let it go. Let it go as a skeptic would. Let it go as, it's not real right now. It doesn't matter right now. I got to pay my taxes right now. I got to make dinner. Ground yourself in mundane activities so that when you go back into that ritual chamber, it's fresh and beautiful again. And it's not an obsession for you. And when spirits talk to you and they tell you conflicting things from what other people have told you, don't fight it. What I mean by that is don't fight the other people. Accept what the Spirit's telling you and work with that if you trust that Spirit to be true. But don't make it your personal goal to change the world, to see it the way you want, because that's when you start getting into the danger. of insanity and magic. And let's be honest, there are many people practicing magic who that is the biggest danger they will ever face. Magic itself is pretty safe. So spirituality, it's pretty safe. And there's a lot of people who are superstitious and they really want magic to be scary and powerful and dangerous so they can feel special for being the only ones able to deal with that dangerous practice. But I'm here to tell you, if a little kid can do it, and they do, anyone can do it safely. You really don't think those little kids saying their little rhymes, doing their little movements and dances and playing their games aren't doing magic at that moment? You really don't think so? And they're perfectly safe doing so. A little kid going into the bathroom and saying Bloody Mary 3 times in a dark room in front of a mirror, that's not a magic spell. Bloody Mary is not an egregore that you can't contact. You really don't think so? Try it. It may not have ever been a real person or a real spirit, but it's become one because people believe in it. They're afraid of it. Like Santa Claus, like Jesus. My point is, practice non-attachment. Practice grounding from time to time. And remember to bring that as above and that so below and bring them together. In the middle is where you must be. In the middle, balanced, with both feet on either side of the veil. You got to straddle that veil and refuse to let yourself fall into the trap of believing your own bullshit. And if you're someone who has a pre-existing mental issue, whatever it might be, check yourself. Have others help you validate things. Get someone you can trust who's not just going to say yes to everything you say, to go along and challenge you, to be your adversary, to test you from time to time. Just to keep you grounded a little bit. Without that traction, you go nowhere. It's kind of like a kite. If you've ever flown a kite, you know that if you let go of the string, the kite will fly away and then it'll crash because there's nothing holding it up in the air anymore. Because in order for it to be held up in the air, there has to be tension. There has to be resistance. You have to have rules in order for magic to work. You get rid of all rules, magic will stop working, I promise you. You'll start going crazy without those rules. You might see things, you might experience things, but it's not going to be the same. The rules themselves are up to you to a very large degree. But you must have them. And just like that kite, if you cut that string of grounding, if that kite is not grounded, it will not fly. You must stay grounded, or else your magic will not fly. Anyway, guys, this is D.H. Thorne. If you like what I'm doing, you can support me by going to the description below, where I have links to my books on Amazon. I have Become the Maelstrom, which is a great book for beginners who want to learn left-hand path, non-dualistic sorcery. And then there's Shadownomicon, which is, of course, much more advanced and dangerous for those who might not have much experience in magic, and certainly dangerous for those who have a very active shadow, we'll put it that way. Otherwise, if you want to support me, you can always like, share, and subscribe. And in the comments, in the description, there's also a link to my Teespring where you can get tapestries like these, which can be used as ritual mats, ritual temple artifacts. You can hang them up as a tapestry. You can put your altar in front of it and use it as a focus, or you can even get the bigger version, put it on the floor, use it as a ritual mat. And I have a whole bunch of other things, t-shirts and stuff too, in case you're interested. All of this supports me and helps me remain to be a professional, make long videos like these, and do my live streams and so on, and continue writing and doing my work. So if you like what I'm doing, you want to help out, or you want to get a piece of what I do, that's a good way to do it. Until next time, mind the shadows.